Hello, Archie Dunlop here with Talking Astrology with Archie on Friday, April the 19th, 2024. Today is Bicycle Day. At least some people celebrate it, Bicycle Day. And Bicycle Day is when some people celebrate the day that someone first took LSD in a deliberate way. And that person was the discoverer of LSD, Albert Hofmann. And on April the 19th, 1943, he took the first dose of the substance, at least the first deliberate dose. A few days earlier, on April the 16th, he had been exposed to LSD accidentally. He felt some effects, he saw some visuals, but I don't think it was super dramatic, and he sort of made the connection with this substance that he had synthesized in the late 30s but hadn't touched. But he thought maybe there was a link between the way he felt and the LSD, and so he decided to deliberately take a dose, and he found out that it really was an extremely powerful drug. So that is something that people celebrate. The reason it's Bicycle Day is because the drug first started having its impact when he was on his bicycle, when he was going home, I think, after ingesting it. And that's Bicycle Day. And so one thinks, oh yeah, that's an interesting day. April the 19th, 1943, that's something to celebrate. I mean, some people might regard it as something to celebrate, but we shouldn't forget that Switzerland wasn't the only place in the world. You know, Switzerland, April the 19th, 1943, would have been sort of an oasis of tranquility. You think of sort of a nice road in Basel, Switzerland, everything with peace and quiet, and I don't know whether there are mountains in Basel, but the trouble is that there were other things going on in the world. April the 19th, 1943, was the beginning of the ghetto uprising in Warsaw. So the Warsaw Ghetto was this part of Warsaw under German occupation where the Jews had been corralled and forced to live, and at 6 o'clock in the morning, German and I think also Ukrainian troops went into the ghetto, or tried to get into the ghetto, to round up the Jews for deportation, and there was resistance because the Jews in the Warsaw Ghetto, they knew what was going to happen. They knew what was being planned, and they decided, well, they might as well resist. And so it was also the beginning of the Warsaw Ghetto uprising, which continued for some time. We shouldn't confuse that, by the way, with the Warsaw uprising, the general Warsaw uprising, which was, I think, in August 1944. So there were two uprisings, but the 1943 uprising specifically related to the Warsaw Ghetto. And I want to look at those, and I want to ask, is there any way in which we can see a single astrological event and relate it to historical events? One, you could say, relatively trivial, just someone playing with a drug for the first time. The other, very tragic and heroic, the Warsaw Ghetto uprising. So that's broadly what I want to do today. I also want to have a quick look at the horoscope of that elephant that escaped a few days ago in Butte, Montana. I think there's something interesting in that chart. I mean, not particularly interesting, but I think it's worth looking very quickly at that chart. But before I do that, I want to look at the astrology and the I Ching for today, which is Friday, April the 19th, 2024. So there it is. Top right, well, we've obviously got a picture of a bicycle because it's Bicycle Day. There is a picture of an LSD molecule, and there is a picture of Albert Hofmann, the inventor of LSD, the man who first synthesized it and the man who first took it. But looking at what's happening today, the moon is very much in Virgo, completely in Virgo. and it is moving towards an opposition of Saturn. I think that moon opposition Saturn is a bit tough. After all, moon in Virgo, focusing on the details, trying to make sure everything is right, and then it's making an opposition to Saturn. Saturn can make things a bit strained. It may be sometimes a bit difficult to express our feelings, and things may take longer than expected, and certainly expressing our emotions could be hard work. I mean, it's not just, doesn't mean we don't have emotions. We certainly have them, but it may be that these emotions, in fact, may actually be holding us back, perhaps because we're concerned about what people are going to say or how they're going to react. You know, there is Saturn in Pisces, opposition Moon in Virgo. And so it could be Saturn holding us back. Perhaps Saturn is about deep emotions, pools of emotions. That reminder of that tarot card, I think is it the Eight of Cups or the Seven of Cups, which in the Crowley pack, which has these dark pools of mud connected with Saturn in Pisces, and Moon is opposition that. And that's certainly not easy. Having said that, there are other things going on which have a slightly different message. There is a conjunction between Mercury and Venus today. This is a very fortunate conjunction. I've talked about it before, and I regard Mercury conjunct Venus as being very creative. Can be about art. It can be about using our talents, expressing our talents, whether our talents are to do with painting, literature, business, writing, whatever. So if we've got any talents or abilities, whatever their form, now is certainly the time to be expressing them, because people want to hear about them, and people are going to be appreciative. Even if we've got a talent that we don't really take seriously, now might be the time to bring it out into the open. Also, Mars there's Mars at 2130. Mars is sextile. Let's get this right. Mars is in Pisces, is sextile the Jupiter-Uranus conjunction. You know, the Jupiter-Uranus conjunction is really close now. And I know I've just talked about moon opposition Saturn and talked about the problems of moon opposition Saturn, but Mars sextile the Jupiter-Uranus conjunction is just a very different energy. Jupiter-Uranus is about freedom, the quest for freedom, how we need to be free. And Mars is sextile with Jupiter-Uranus conjunction. That's even more pressing. We want to be ourselves. There's so much we want to do. There's so much we can accomplish, and we don't want anything to hold us back. And if Moon is opposition Saturn, well, how seriously are we going to take that? Maybe with this Moon opposition Saturn, we shouldn't allow it to sabotage our plans. Perhaps we should try to be constructive about this Moon opposition Saturn. And what this Moon opposition Saturn should be is about structuring ourselves. So if we've got an idea, maybe the idea on its own isn't good enough, and we just have to do a little bit of work on it. And so perhaps we should use this Moon opposition Saturn in a constructive sense, and not just feel it's a problem, but it's a millstone around our neck. And at the same time as all this is happening, the Sun is moving into Taurus. Yes, the Sun, I'm afraid, is out of Aries. Well, I say afraid because the Sun in Aries is exalted. It's a great place for the Sun, but the Sun can't stay in Aries forever. And at 3 o'clock in the afternoon, London time, the Sun moves into Taurus. That would be 4 o'clock in the afternoon on Western continental Europe, most of Western continental Europe. I don't know about Lisbon and Madrid, Spain and Portugal. And if you're in the Americas, well, the Sun goes into Taurus at 10 in the morning. If you're on the East Coast, if you're in California, Portland, in Portland, Oregon, for example, or that's Oregon or Washington State or British Columbia, then the sun would go into Taurus at 7 in the morning. So really, if you're in the Americas, you've got the sun in Taurus all day. And okay, unless you get up early. If you are in Australia or New Zealand, well, the sun doesn't go into Taurus today. It goes into Taurus tomorrow. So that is the geocentric picture. Let me have a quick look at the heliocentric picture. So let me just switch that round. I'm not saying I'm going to see anything. I didn't look at the heliocentric picture beforehand. So this is a heliocentric picture. So what we see is that there's Mars. Remember, this is from the sun's perspective. We're putting sun in the middle here. Earth is on its own. We don't consider the moon because the moon, from the sun's perspective, the sun, the Earth and the moon are in the same place. So we can see that Mars is square Jupiter, sort of moving off the Jupiter-Uranus midpoint. So that may suggest quite a lot of action. Just collective action. People have got a lot of energy. Sometimes that energy could be used in the wrong way. There's the potential there for a little bit of violence because it's Mars and it's square Jupiter. We mustn't be fooled just by thinking, oh, Jupiter's a good planet. Not necessarily. Certainly from a heliocentric perspective, Mars-Jupiter square can just be heightened energy, people having too much energy, maybe. And at the same time, we see 3 planets at 0 degrees. Earth at 0 degrees Scorpio. Remember, the sun has just moved into Taurus. That means the Earth has just moved into Scorpio. Earth at 0 degrees Scorpio. Pluto at 0 degrees Aquarius. And Venus at 0 degrees Aries. So when you put that together, we see a fair amount of intensity today, emotional intensity perhaps. Perhaps we're also trying to express our power. Earth square Pluto, the issue of power is going to be very important today. And that's a reminder, by the way, that Earth, from a heliocentric perspective, Earth square Pluto is the same effectively as saying Sun square Pluto. The Sun is going to square Pluto geocentrically in a couple of days' time, because heliocentric and geocentric Pluto are very, very close to each other. And Pluto sextile Venus, that's, again, emotional intensity, may have something to do with relationships, or more about how governments try to express themselves. Governments are into control, trying to form alliances, Venus sextile Pluto, trying to bring people on board through persuasion. That might be another way that Venus sextile Pluto is going on. So in fact, the heliocentric picture is quite busy, though we shouldn't forget that the heliocentric picture is more collective. It's not so much about the individual. We can still feel it. I remember, I was talking about Mars square Uranus a few days ago, and I was looking at some of the comments, and someone was saying how they had cut themselves, and they never cut themselves with a knife, and they were linking that with perhaps the Mars square, with the heliocentric Mars square Uranus. That's a possibility. I don't know. I suppose we shouldn't try to read too much into these things, but maybe that's Mars square Uranus affecting some of us as individuals. But the heliocentric picture is more collective rather than personal. So that's the heliocentric picture. And what I want to do now is look at what's going on for the 12 signs. So let's just go back to the geocentric world. There we are. Okay, so what I want to do now is look at the astrology and the I Ching. Sorry, let's start again. What I want to do now is look at what's going on today, Friday, April 19th, 2024, for the 12 signs. So these are my forecasts. Aries. It's a day which on the surface seems quite low profile. The moon is in Virgo. From an Aries perspective, when the moon is in Virgo, it is potentially quite low profile. You take the view, Aries, that really you've got things to do. Not major things to do, just lots of little things that just need to be done. You need to get them out of the way, and that just can't be helped. And I think, Aries, you're going to be more focused on details than usual. And I understand that Aries as a sign is not particularly details orientated, so that might feel a little bit tedious. And while that's going on, the sun is starting to move out of your sign. Yes, it moves into Taurus. And so that does create a big change. The sun in Aries was great for you. It should have been. The sun in Aries, exalted in Aries, that did give you a lot of power. And so with the sun moving into Taurus, you might feel that your power levels are starting to go down, but you just don't have as much power as you used to. But maybe in some respects, Aries, it's a little bit of a relief having the sun moving out of your sign. It puts less pressure on you for one thing. And secondly, it gives you an opportunity to consolidate some of the things you have done, achieved, created over the last month. And consolidate is really what it's all about with Sun in Taurus. Taurus is an earth sign. It's about stability. It's about consolidating things. So whatever you've achieved over the last month, you need to get it together. Make sure you don't lose those achievements. Make sure that if you've created something, you're actually able to sustain it. Because sustainability really does matter. You can have all your actions and things you're doing in the world, big ideas, big initiatives, but you can't keep up that level of energy forever. At some stage, and perhaps the stage when the sun goes into Taurus, you have to consider how are you going to bring it all down to earth. But there is something else going on, and that is Mars. Now, Mars, superficially, seems to be in quite a low-profile sector of your chart. It's in Pisces, the sign before Aries. But Mars is making a sextile to Jupiter and Uranus. Mars is your ruler. So if Mars is sextile Jupiter and Uranus, then actually you have a lot of energy at your disposal. Now, that doesn't mean to say that you use this energy in a chaotic and impulsive way. Maybe yesterday or the day before you would have done that, but not today, not now. You have to use your abilities and your talents to constructively harness this energy. And although it sounds exciting, Mars sextile Jupiter and Uranus, it's just important not to make a big fuss about it, not to make a big deal about this. You don't want to tell the whole world what you're doing. But nonetheless, you have a sense that you're onto something, that also freedom is going to be very important to you. And Aries, you can express your freedom without anyone needing to know about it. It's not necessary for people to know what Aries is so worked up about it. If you want your freedom, you just do your own thing. You do what you want to do. And you just don't have to advertise the fact. In fact, the less you advertise the fact, the better. Because when you don't advertise the fact, when there's no pressure, that's when you can get real results. Taurus, you have a great sense of your own self-worth and what you can do. Because really, Taurus, today you can do a lot. After all, the moon is in Virgo, and moon in Virgo from a Taurian perspective is it's very creative. You can make a very powerful impact, but you don't really need to make an impact on other people. You shouldn't be trying to make an impact on other people in some respects, because you're the one that matters. But that doesn't mean to say that other people aren't important, because one of the main aspects today is a conjunction between Mercury and Venus. Venus is your ruler. It's conjunct Mercury. You do have a lot to say, and you do actually have a lot to communicate. And your capacity to communicate is improved by the fact that the sun is moving into your sign. Yes, today the sun moves into Taurus. Okay, tomorrow if you're in Eastern Asia, Australia, New Zealand, but the sun is moving into Taurus. And it's clear that you've just got so much to contribute, so much to offer, and people should be interested in what you've got to say. But you should not be overly impacted by outside opinions. The reason is that the moon in Virgo, from a Taurian perspective, yes, it's in a very creative position, but the moon is actually making an opposition to Saturn. And I think you have to be a little bit careful with that opposition to Saturn. Saturn could represent someone or a situation that could hold you back, perhaps force you to ask questions that don't really need to be asked at this stage, but that this moon opposition Saturn could just make you self-conscious. So beware of people who don't appreciate what you're doing, who don't understand what you're doing, who maybe even don't like what you're doing. You know who these people are, I think. Perhaps they give the impression of being wiser than you or knowing more than you. It's just an impression. But these kind of people should possibly be avoided, though I suppose if you're doing something really stupid, of course you need to be advised that that's a bad idea. But I think in a normal day-to-day sense, you're not going to be doing anything stupid. And I think, Taurus, you can trust yourself to do the right thing. And you should also be able to trust yourself to choose the right friends and the right associates. Yes, it's true that moon is opposition Saturn, so there are certain people that should be avoided. On the other hand, Mars, which from a Taurian perspective is a planet that's very associated with other people, it's ruler of Scorpio, your opposite sign. Mars is sextile Jupiter and Uranus. So there seem to be a couple of people out there who do have a true vision of freedom. And it's the kind of freedom that you want a part of. And if you're with these people, they can be very uplifting. So do choose your company, Taurus. I think there are people out there who can really help you, achieve whatever you want to achieve, but there are other people who could just hold you back and they could just be a pain. So it's just important to make the right choices there. Gemini. It is a day when, in one sense, you're going to feel that you don't really want to be bothered. Perhaps you feel that you've just got everything sorted out, and you're comfortable. So why make the effort? I mean, I think that's how you come into the day. But I'm not convinced that that's how it should be. I think you have to try a little harder there. Yes, it's true that you can appreciate your own world, but it's not the whole world, and you have to take advantage of available opportunities, especially today with when Mercury is your ruler, of course, when Mercury is conjunct Venus. So Mercury conjunct Venus, Mercury, your ruler, conjunct Venus, is very fortunate. Venus is the lesser benefic. Venus is also associated with other people. And you can really benefit from associating with other people. That, of course, does mean that you have to go out there. You can't just stay in one place, as I think many Geminis will be inclined to do. You do have to go out there, and you have to show people what you've got and talk about your ideas. Just, it might not feel right to begin with. It might feel that it's a lot of effort, but you just need to keep going. You need to keep ploughing on. And in that sense, I think that you'll make the right connections, and you'll also find that your sense of beauty and harmony does accord with the world around you, and people will like the way you present yourself. I don't know, perhaps the way you dress, or the way you speak, and that's something, Gemini, that you can really use if you want to. If you want to, and I think you should, and you need to just really resist the temptation to just sit in your own little bubble, and just realize that there are lots of people who you can connect with, and you can take advantage of their company. So just make sure that you do all that, Gemini. And if you happen to be working today, or having to have any form of high profile, especially with an organizational or group setting, you are going to feel that constant pressure. It's something you're just not going to want to do. So if you're working, your first impulse will just be to focus on what needs to be done, and you're not going to want any interference. But that interference is going to come. It's going to happen. And you shouldn't be annoyed about it. In fact, you should be welcoming it. It's allowing you to perhaps get out of your shell. So, Gemini, that's the overall picture for today. You start the day, I think, feeling that, what's the point? You just don't want to do anything, and you're going to have to really motivate yourself. But it is worth the effort. It really is. And don't fall into the trap of thinking that you're completely special. Yes, you are special. We're all special. But you're not totally special. You're not so special that you can ignore the outside world. And really, that's it, Gemini. I think you know what needs to be done. Cancer. It's potentially quite a tricky day, Cancer. And the reason is that the moon is making an opposition to Saturn. Now, I should say, before I go on, there are lots of good things happening today, but it still could be tricky. And I think a lot of it has to do with that moon opposition Saturn. So the moon is your ruler, and it is opposition Saturn. So you may feel that you're being blocked, that something's just preventing you from expressing yourself. And You might also feel that you can't say what you want. Yes, there are certainly things you'd like to say, but you're concerned that the world out there is not sufficiently appreciative. Saturn is ruler of Capricorn, of your opposite sign. It's often connected from a Cancerian perspective with relationships. So if Moon opposition Saturn, it might be that you and someone else don't see eye to eye. And this person that you don't see eye to eye with, it may feel that they're blocking you. They're cramping your style. And in extreme situations, you may come to the conclusion that you and someone else just do not get on with each other at all. Opposition, as William Lilly said in his 17th century in Christian astrology, he said, squares are perfect enmity and oppositions are perfect hatred. So that is one possibility with Moon opposition Saturn, okay, not hating someone, but recognizing that you and someone else just have not just completely different priorities, but don't really get on. And you have to work out what that means. If you really feel that you and someone else don't get on, is that a temporary feeling just because you don't like their behavior today? Or is it something more permanent? And that should give you some food for thought there. But don't dwell on it. I think Cancerians can sometimes retreat into themselves and think that they need to just work with a difficult world that doesn't fully understand them, and they can just get into a spiral that really goes into a place that they shouldn't really be having to go to. You need to look at what other things are going on. The sun is moving into Taurus. I think sun going into Taurus is not a bad thing. The sun in Taurus it's quite a Cancer-friendly sign, Taurus. I mean, the moon is, after all, exalted in Taurus. So when the sun is in Taurus, it's a time of year that you generally feel that you can relate to what's happening. You feel that there's a certain sympathy to you, and with the sun in Taurus, you do get a sense of that. Also, there's a conjunction between Mercury and Venus in Aries. Now, Aries is a sign that is important for Cancerians because, from a Cancerian perspective, Aries is a very high-profile sign. And so, with Mercury and Venus making a conjunction to each other in Aries, you feel, or you should feel, that you can actually present yourself to a wider audience. Now, you might not feel that way to begin with. After all, the moon is opposition Saturn. That doesn't make you feel like you want to present anything. But if you make the effort with this Mercury-Venus conjunction in Aries, as soon as you start to communicate, as soon as you start to tell people, what you've got to offer, and perhaps why you're right. But it's not about why you're right and they're wrong. It's just about why you're right, why your view of the world should be taken seriously. If you can start to express that, I think that you'll find that your audience is quite receptive to your message. So, Cancer, it's a day when you perhaps don't really feel like doing too much. I said the same thing to Gemini, by the way. I know that Gemini and Cancer are very different signs, but they seem to be experiencing this moon opposition Saturn in quite a similar way. So, like Gemini, you might feel that you're just not fully able to express yourself. But as soon as you start making the effort, I think you're going to make really good progress. So, Cancer, all I can say is it's just very important that you don't doubt yourself. Leo. the sun is changing sign. And so when the sun changes sign, that is big news for Leo. Whenever the sun changes sign, that is because Leo's ruler is the sun. So we need to really track what the sun is doing. And when the sun moves into Taurus, it means that the sun is moving from a fire sign into an earth sign. So from a Leo perspective, that means that you start becoming more considered, and you start to understand the material universe, and you perhaps become a little slower because you're taking more time to think things through. And the emphasis is not so much on action, but it's now increasingly about stability. And that's going to be something that's very important to you over the next few weeks. And from a Leo perspective, the sign Taurus is often connected with the workplace, with business, with career. So sun moving into Taurus, some Leos, depending on their situation, may feel that they want to put more energy into their work in terms of getting ahead, and they want solid results. It's not like being a shooting star. Because the sun's in Taurus, it wants solidity. And I think that you can very much benefit from all of that. But you can benefit from other things. And I think today you should give careful consideration to your social environment. It does matter, because today you can make a few very fortunate associations with people who may be able to help you out. Not necessarily today, but by making the connection today, you can actually see what people can offer, and at a later stage you can take full advantage of all of that. So really do as much networking as possible. I think you're going to be quite lucky in that regard. So if you make the effort, I think you can actually meet some very interesting and important, perhaps even important people. I won't say important people for sure. Everyone's important in their own way, but people who could at a later stage be quite important for you and could help you out. But I'm not saying that you just have to focus on yourself and making progress and not think about things that are more inspirational. Yes, the sun has left Aries, so perhaps some of the inspiration has gone because you're focusing more on building things up rather than creating new things. But even though the sun has left Aries, Mercury and Venus are making a conjunction. And that Mercury-Venus conjunction does make things quite interesting for you. There are ideas. You might be ambitious, but you've still got ideas. And there are new ideas, new things coming your way. And you shouldn't be close-minded. That is a certain danger today. Leo is a fixed sign. As the sun moves into Taurus, Leo arguably becomes a little more fixed. But don't be closed-minded, because there are some ideas that you need to take into account. Well, I don't say you need to take into account, but you would certainly benefit from taking into account quite interesting ideas. But you need to explore these ideas a bit and perhaps be ready to be a little bit experimental. You don't really want to be experimental, but I think it might be in your interests to try to be experimental, and not to get distracted by short-term worries. I suppose one short-term worry that some Leos might have, something to do with money. I mean, there's an opposition between Moon and Saturn today. I think you'll particularly feel it if you're in the Americas. And this Moon opposition Saturn is across the finance axis of your chart. So you may feel that some things just can't be done because the money isn't there. And, you may be looking at things and the figures just don't add up. I understand the importance of financial prudence, but don't get overly concerned about the eventual cost of something. You need to do the preparation, work things out, see what support you're getting. Maybe the cost isn't such a big deal as you think it is at the moment. I mean, it's certainly important, but don't feel that the cost of something is a deal breaker, because it may not be. Virgo. The moon is still in your sign. Moon is really in the middle of Virgo. Moon is in Virgo for all Virgos. Doesn't matter what your time zone is. Moon is just comfortably there. And at the same time, the sun is moving into Taurus. So from a Virgo perspective, that is really, that's a good thing, because Virgo is an earth sign and the sun is moving into Taurus. Taurus is an earth sign, and you're therefore feeling that you're just in your element, that things are starting to go your way. Now, that doesn't mean to say that everything is fine, but you know that you're on the right track. Now, some people could try to mess things up for you, or at least you might take the view that they're trying to mess things up for you. And that is because today there is an opposition between the Moon and Saturn. Now, this opposition between the Moon and Saturn is particularly going to affect you if you're in the Americas. If you're not in the Americas, it's probably more about tomorrow or early tomorrow. But this Moon opposition Saturn, I mean, I think you're going to feel it wherever you are, whatever your time zone, but I think you're going to feel it more if you're in the Americas. The Moon opposition Saturn, you may take the view that there is a situation or a person that is just holding you back, doesn't want you to move any further. And you might reach the conclusion that there's nothing you can do, that you're just stuck. And that can be quite annoying, just feeling stuck. But do you need to be stuck? I think one reason why you might be stuck, or you might feel stuck, is because at some level you don't want to move. If it feels easier to stay in one place, then you can just say, well, the reason I'm not moving is because I'm stuck. It's not my fault. But in reality, you have the opportunity to move on. You may be overthinking a short-term obstacle. There are always obstacles. We all have obstacles. You may see this obstacle coming up. You may not even have reached this obstacle, but you've decided this is going to be such a big obstacle that there's no point in doing anything. At least that is the risk. And you need to look beyond the obstacle. Especially today, when Mercury, your ruler, is conjunct Venus. That is a great aspect, Mercury conjunct Venus. Many people are actually on your side. Venus is a relationship planet. It's about how you relate to other people. Mercury conjunct Venus means that you get support. Now, you do perhaps have to ask for that support. That support may not be immediately forthcoming, but if you ask for it, it's certainly there. And you may find that when you get a bit of support from the outside world, things really start coming together. And I'm thinking perhaps your creative abilities start clicking into gear, and you really can show the world what you're capable of doing. Virgos always have a secret skill, some skill that they don't want to talk about. They're almost afraid to bring it out into the open. God, they might even be ashamed of it. I don't know why, but Virgos have always got that secret ability. They don't want to tell anyone about it. They just don't think it's worth bothering with, but it is worth bothering with. And I think that Venus conjunct Mercury is really asking you to really bring whatever the skill is, to bring it out into the open. I think that is tremendously important. And while this is going on, you have to make a real effort to consider how people can help you. I mean, I've already said that, but there are people who are prepared to assist you in a gentle way. They're prepared to complete the circle. There may be help available in a more fundamental way. After all, Mars is making a sextile to Jupiter. Now, that aspect, Mars sextile Jupiter, is quite an important aspect. And from a Virgo perspective, Jupiter is ruler of your opposite sign. And Jupiter can very much refer to another person. One particular person who can really be there for you. And Mars is in Pisces, your opposite sign. So more connections with Virgo and relationships, and Mars is making the sextile to Jupiter. So with Mars making the sextile to Jupiter, you really can benefit from another person's company, spending time with another person. And this person may just give you a new way of looking at things, perhaps a way that you just haven't really considered before. And it's further helped by the fact that the Sun is moving into Taurus. That does give you access to new horizons, but horizons that aren't just pie in the sky, that actually have a material basis. So do consider the outside world. Do consider particular people who can be really helpful, who you can actually form really good relationships with. If you're not already in a good relationship with them right now, I mean, don't neglect people who are with you right now. Perhaps you've just got too used to them. Maybe you're starting to maybe you've taken them for granted. You're taking them for granted. But don't take the people close to you for granted, because they could be really helpful if you were to give them a chance. Libra, you feel that there are things going on that you don't entirely understand. And I'm not saying that in a way to make you concerned. I'm just stating something that is obvious. There are things going on that all of us don't understand. And from a Libran perspective, we're talking about the wider world. It's about things happening in the economy, in society, that we don't have any control over. But we can read about them if we want to read about them. If you read the news, watch the news, you can see in what direction the world is heading. It's not a direction that you're entirely comfortable with. Yeah, you can see opportunities, but you can also see big problems. And perhaps we're talking about, we are talking about the economy, and what happens out there in the world does eventually filter down to affect us as individuals. And I think, Libra, that's what you're starting to recognize. And I really don't want to over-dramatize it. And I'm telling you this because I want to encourage you to think about the global situation and how it might affect you. Because if you can think about the global situation and how it might affect you and get some ideas about how it might affect you, then you might be in a better position to make a few changes to your life so that you can start preparing yourself for the challenges that I think are going to soon make themselves felt. I mean, not just for you, but for everyone. So that's the first point to make. Second point to make is that today Mercury makes a conjunction to Venus, and this conjunction is very useful. Mercury is the communication planet. It's also the planet of ideas. So when Mercury makes a conjunction to Venus, it can feel that you're starting to understand things that you just might not have understood before. Maybe you're understanding things on your own because you're doing some thinking, or perhaps you're talking to other people and they're trying to explain things, and suddenly the penny drops, you get it. And once you understand things, you're in a position to take action, and some of your action could be quite fortunate. It could be about working on something that is really special to you, and perhaps you can start working on something that is special to you. It's about your unique contribution, but it's about a contribution that is really going to help the world, or at least your world. I'm not saying the whole world; it's just your little part of the world. What you're working on can be beneficial for yourself and those around you. And talking about relationships and how other people are behaving, other people must not be underestimated. That's because Mars is making a sextile aspect to Jupiter and Uranus. Some people, they're doing stuff, they want to do stuff, they can't help themselves, they're just doing stuff. You might find it a little bit disturbing at first, but once you understand what they're doing, it could be quite impressive. Maybe there are one or two people who are engaged in some kind of reorganization, and this reorganization at first seems worrying. Reorganization is always worrying, particularly if you don't know why things are being reorganized. But if you look hard at this reorganization, you'll see that you can actually benefit from it. So when you see people planning on doing things, don't be too suspicious. Just ask a few questions, try to work out why they're making the changes they're making. And I think once you realize what people are doing, Libra, then I think that you'll start to recognize that it's a change for the better. Scorpio. Mars is your ruler, and it is making a sextile aspect to Jupiter and Uranus. I think that this sextile aspect between Mars on one hand and Jupiter and Uranus on the other is actually pretty interesting. Jupiter and Uranus as a principle is about expressing the need to be free. And I think right now, Scorpio, you really value your freedom. You don't want anything holding you back. And I think that's absolutely reasonable given the times we're in. And this Jupiter-Uranus conjunction is really close. So everyone is feeling a little bit on edge because they want something more and they don't appreciate being held back. And with Mars sextile Jupiter and Uranus, it is kind of personal to you. You've perhaps had enough of being held back. You've perhaps had enough of worrying too much about other people. And with Mars sextile Jupiter Uranus, you can certainly find your freedom, but it doesn't have to be a fight. Yeah, it's easy to assume a conflict with Mars sextile Jupiter and Uranus, but there's no need to assume a conflict. You might actually find that people who you thought were a problem are actually not a problem at all. Rather than hold you back, they might actually be encouraging you to do whatever you need to do, and you may actually get more support than you realize. But you have to explain what you're doing, why you're doing it, if you can, and just a little bit of explanation goes a long way. If you don't make any explanations, if you don't say what you're doing, if you don't say what you're planning, sure, people are going to be suspicious. But if you're prepared to provide some explanation, I don't think you'll get much resistance. I think actually you'll be getting understanding. Another thing happening today is that the Sun is moving into Taurus. And from a Scorpio perspective, that is important. It's important because Taurus is your opposite sign. And so when the Sun moves into Taurus, it's often a time of year when you do have to give consideration to outside forces and outside influences. And yes, other people, you do have to give them consideration. That doesn't mean to say you have to compromise. You just have to understand what they're doing and why they're doing it, as I think I've already suggested earlier on in this piece. And if there is something big, Scorpio, that you're trying to get off the ground over the next few weeks, with Sun moving into Taurus, there is a suggestion here that on your own you may not be able to achieve what you need to achieve. You may be disappointed with the results. But if you can bring in other people and get their help and advice, it's just going to be so much easier to get things done. And making the right connections can make the difference actually between success and failure. So now, as the Sun is moving through Taurus, okay, I understand if you're in Australia or New Zealand, the Sun doesn't go into Taurus until tomorrow. But now is the time to start perhaps getting support, talking to people about what you're planning, because once you get that help, it just could make all the difference. So don't dismiss the importance of the Sun going into Taurus. On your own, there are limits to what can be done. When you're with other people, maybe the sky's the limit. Sagittarius. You continue to feel that it's important to be noticed. I suppose Sagittarians always feel at some level that they need to be noticed. And I think you may regard results as being quite important. Yeah, results matter. And you want to see yourself having an impact on the world out there. And if you're not making an impact, you take the view that something is wrong. So yes, you just want to get on with it. But you might find that there are times when it's hard work, when there is resistance. Now, you might take the view that this resistance is coming perhaps from your family, maybe. After all, the moon is making an opposition to Saturn, and from a Sagittarian perspective, moon opposition Saturn, with the moon in Virgo, Saturn in Pisces, can suggest that people close to you, people who you know very well, are preventing you from getting things done. But perhaps you shouldn't personalize the situation. Maybe what is preventing you from getting things done is you being overly concerned about perhaps the past, perhaps concepts of roots. We all have concepts of roots. Even Sagittarius has concepts of roots. Just being overly concerned about it, and you're always looking over your shoulder. And because you're always looking over your shoulder, you might find that your ability to make things happen is restricted. So don't automatically blame people if things aren't moving as fast as you feel they should be moving. And at the same time, don't be in too much of a hurry. Maybe it's 2 steps forward, 1 step back, 2 steps forward, 1 step back. You make a big advance, and then you should be stopping, and you should be consolidating it, making sure everything is in order, and then you move again. And that links up with the fact that the moon's in Virgo, is an earth sign, and the sun is now moving into Taurus. And earth signs are asking you to be patient, and that's something that Sagittarians perhaps don't want to do. But if you can be patient, I think that would be useful. And at the same time, Sagittarius, somehow you need to harness something that you know really well. You know it so well that it's just become part of the background. You haven't even noticed it. Now, that could be a couple of things. It could be something you have which you're not using. It could be someone you know very well, really well, and they're in a position to really help you in a big way, but you're just ignoring them. Perhaps because you know them too well, and familiarity breeds contempt. So who is that person you're taking for granted? Perhaps you know them so well, you have contempt for them. Who is that person? And maybe you're missing a real opportunity here. Mars is sextile Jupiter. Jupiter is you. Jupiter is your ruler. And so with that Mars sextile Jupiter, that could really give you the lift you need. But are you going to use that opportunity? Perhaps it's that major boost forward comes from perhaps a member of your family, someone you've taken for granted, someone you don't take seriously, someone you're not listening to. I suppose it might also be an ability you have that you're not really taking seriously. Just something needs to be harnessed, but you're not harnessing. And the moment you harness it, then everything comes together really nicely. And finally, I should say, don't underestimate other people. It's kind of more of the same message, but Mercury is making a conjunction to Venus. Mercury is ruler of Gemini, your opposite sign. It's conjunct Venus, and that means that there are some really clever people around you, and those clever people have got so much to offer, but if you don't engage with them, then you're not going to be able to take full advantage of them. Capricorn. Moon is now in Virgo. The moon went into Virgo, started going into Virgo yesterday, but the moon is now firmly in Virgo. And in one sense, that is a good thing, because Virgo is an earth sign. And from a Capricorn perspective, it's good having stuff in earth signs, because earth is your element. And I think you have a chance to get to grips with new things which in the past you had regarded as being over your head, but now they're not over. But now you look at them again, and they're well grounded. They make sense. You can fit them all in, and that should be really useful. But I think, Capricorn, there is a danger that you may be a little too critical, quick to criticize. If something doesn't seem right at first, it doesn't meet your expectations, you may want to criticize it before even looking at it. Or you may want to just discount it. It's just too weird, doesn't fit in with your plans, you're not going to be bothered with it. I would suggest, Capricorn, that you try to be a little more open-minded. This is really because the moon is opposition Saturn, and when I talked about the broad planetary picture, I mentioned this moon opposition Saturn, and I was, I suppose, fairly negative about the moon opposition Saturn, and I was suggesting that it might be other people creating obstacles, but you are Saturn, and so it may be you're the one creating obstacles and reasons why something can't happen. Now, it may well be, but you're just being a sensible Capricorn. You can see that something is completely impractical, and you're just being honest. That is possible. It's also possible that you're just being negative for the sake of it. So, Capricorn, do consider that. If today you're going to criticize something or pick something to pieces, ask yourself, what are your motives? Are your motives humane and constructive? In which case, that's fine. But it's also possible that you're just being resistant to change, and maybe you're even being a bit lazy. Lazy as in not being bothered to really hear something out. Something that could be useful, could be exciting, but you're not giving it a chance. So, Capricorn, I really think it is important to give things a chance. And perhaps, Capricorn, you may be able to take an idea which in itself, at least on the surface, is just not very good. It doesn't seem to be very well thought out. Taking this idea and somehow being able to really change it and transmute it into something that really could work extremely well. And you can engage it, and you can engage this idea and change it and transform it and really make something special out of it. And I think that approach would be well appreciated. Turning to relationships, we cannot deny the fact that the moon is opposition Saturn. From a relationship point of view, the moon represents the other person. Moon is ruler of Cancer, your opposite sign. And so with moon opposition Saturn, I think you may find that you and someone else are poles apart. You're looking at things from a completely different perspective, and it may be difficult, if not impossible, to come to a compromise. You're just dealing with two views that cannot be reconciled. And there's no point really in arguing about it. It's just accepting that two people have completely different views. And two people can have completely different views and remain friends. It is possible. So don't take things too seriously in terms of views and opinions. And hopefully the other person won't take things too seriously either. And if you do have an argument about some, I don't know, it could be something political or something that seems extraneous, seems silly to have an argument about, seems silly to fall out about it. But if you do have that kind of heated argument, don't take things to heart, and don't take what people say to heart, because it's perhaps not quite as serious as it sounds. Though, I should say, if you happen to be in an argument with someone and you absolutely feel that you need to win the argument, regardless, then I think you can. But don't force it. Don't try to win an argument unless it's really important. Because, just because you've got a lot of power, secret power, power deep down in your soul, doesn't mean you have to use the power. Just keep it to yourself unless it's really necessary, and don't feel it's important to win every argument you get into. Aquarius. Moon is now solidly in Virgo, and it's making an opposition to Saturn. And that moon opposition Saturn could be a little bit problematic. I don't think you're going to be quite yourself. You'll feel that there are just difficult things to deal with, and even, yes, they're difficult to deal with, but do you even want to deal with them? Do you really want to engage? And I think in many cases, Aquarius, you're not going to want to engage. Especially today, when the sun is moving into Taurus. Taurus is a fixed sign. And from an Aquarian perspective, it's very low profile. And so sun moving into Taurus means that Aquarius is just going to perhaps want to ground itself and focus on what it knows rather than moving out there into some experimental world. Experimentation is not something you're into at the moment. I mean, I know that Aquarius is a forward-thinking sign, is sometimes known for being quite inventive, but I just don't think today, I don't think that's really your priority. I think you just want to basically ground things, though I think you can make some contacts. I don't think you should completely close off the your social world. I think you could actually be quite lucky in who you meet and who you come across. And Aquarius, it's just then going to be very important that you actually appreciate this luck, that you see this luck and you say, you're comfortable with it and you're prepared to see where it goes. That would be nice. So what do they say? Don't look a gift horse in the mouth. I think today, Aquarius, there may be a few gift horses, but you have to interact with the gift horse, and don't just be so focused on yourself that you just can't see the opportunities as they come your way. Pisces, I think that things could be happening today, and I mean that in a mainly beneficial way. We've got a sextile aspect between Mars and Jupiter. So Jupiter, Pisces, is your ruler, and when Mars makes a sextile to Jupiter, it does energize Jupiter. It gives you a boost. And Jupiter is also getting a boost by the fact that Jupiter is starting to get really close to Uranus. So what's happening is that Mars is sextiling the Jupiter-Uranus conjunction. And so Jupiter is doubly hit. It's hit by Uranus and it's hit by Mars. And I think overall this is fortunate. I think it does give you a sense of excitement, a sense that there's something that needs to be done, something that you'd like to be doing. And why wait? You might as well just go for it. Well, you might still have your reservations. You're certainly aware of how things can go wrong. You're also aware that some people might appear to be holding you back. I mean, that is because, Pisces, there is an opposition between the moon and Saturn. The moon is in Virgo, your opposite sign, and Saturn is opposition the moon. And you might regard other people as a problem, other people holding you back. But is that really the case? It may actually be the opposite. It may actually be you holding other people back, but somehow you thinking that it's the opposite. So in one-to-one relationships, ask yourself, who is holding who back? And consider the possibility that you actually have quite a lot of agency. You have control over the situation. If you don't want to be held back, then don't hold other people back. I suppose that's a reminder that freedom is a two-way process. If you want to be truly free, you have to let people be free. And once you recognize that, then things really start moving. And it goes back to what I was saying about Mars being sextile, the Jupiter-Uranus conjunction. It is about freedom and finding a way to be free and not worrying too much about what other people are doing, and just allowing yourself to go wherever spirit takes you. And I think today it might be a good idea if you have a geographically diverse day. And by geographically diverse, I don't mean traveling huge distances. I mean just moving from place to place, a couple of small journeys. You might find that satisfying. And by moving to lots of different places, you're giving yourself the opportunity to increase your chances. And of course, going to different places can be done in many different ways. You don't physically have to go there necessarily. I mean, I don't know, we're not quite in the world of virtual reality. I'm not quite sure about that, how much people use virtual reality, but I suppose in a virtual reality perspective, you can physically go to different places without going anywhere. Is that how it works? But by keeping your options open, Pisces, I think really that is the way to really make things happen. And as I've said to a lot of the signs, don't underestimate other people. And that's to do with that Mercury conjunct Venus that is exact today. I've said this a lot. Other people should not be underestimated. People can be of assistance in many different ways if you give them a chance. And from your perspective, the Mercury-Venus conjunction is in a sign very much connected with money. And the Mercury-Venus conjunction is about ability. And if you have any concerns about money, consider the possibility that your own abilities can actually get you through. Because Mercury-Venus conjunction can actually be about business skills and financial skills, and that you can bring to bear, probably with another person's assistance, but not necessarily. Venus is not just the planet of relationships, it is the planet of money. And Mercury conjunct Venus can be very flexible with money, can have lots of ideas for making money. So in that department, don't doubt yourself. And certainly what you mustn't do is let financial concerns bother you unduly, because it does seem that if you are versatile, you can find a way of sorting things out. Assuming there's something that needs to be sorted out. I don't want to talk about a problem if no problem exists. That's it. Those are my forecasts for the 12 signs. And we can also look at today from the perspective of the I Ching. And I asked the question, what is Friday going to be like for those watching the I Ching segment of this video? And the first hexagram I got was hexagram 15, which is modesty. So the image is quite clear here. Modesty is about not pushing ourselves too far. You can look at the hexagram for modesty. Bottom three lines represents a mountain. the top three lines represent, all broken, or passivity. So the mountain bottom three lines represents fundamentally who we are. It's enough to just be who we are. The bedrock, and I kind of think that fits with the sun starting to move into Taurus. We don't have to pretend to be someone else. We don't have to have affectations. We know what we're good at, and that's enough. And it's just not a good day for showing off. We don't have to show off. It's unnecessary. It's not expected of us, and we can achieve our aims without having a big show. But there is a moving line here. It's the fifth line moving. So modesty can have its limits. And we may be in a situation where something isn't right. It may be someone is doing something they shouldn't be doing. Someone may be behaving irresponsibly. Now you could say, well, the modest thing to do is just to be passive about it and just say, well, that's the way it is. Let's not show off. But this is not about showing off. You can intervene without showing off. And so perhaps it's a situation where you have to show authority. Not because you're showing off. It's because it's the right thing to do. The I Ching is perhaps saying that, when you're, from looking at it from a sort of classical historical point of view, when you see that the rulers are behaving badly, it doesn't matter how modest you are, you actually have to intervene. It's your obligation to intervene. So if something's not being done right, then there's no choice. We have to intervene and be quite stern about it. And that's still being modest. We're not showing off because we're doing what needs to be done. And once we do that, this hexagram modesty, it moves to a second hexagram, which is 39, which is obstruction. And that kind of makes sense, doesn't it? Because if someone is not behaving, we've got a situation which is difficult, but we have to intervene in, there's going to be pushback. Of course, I must make it clear, some situations you shouldn't intervene with. If they're dangerous, then sure, don't take risks. But again, I'm talking more about stuff that happens on a day-to-day level. And so when we do start to intervene, when we do start to get involved, we do hit a bit of an obstruction. And it may be actually difficult to get things done. And short term, we may have to back off. I don't think we're going to be able to see it through. And so there's a bit of a contradiction here, because with 15, there is a clear indication that we need to take action, that we can't just do nothing if we see that something is wrong. But then with 39, it says, well, yeah, but you're not going to achieve much. Well, perhaps that's the way it is. We have to intervene as much as we can, as far as we can. But at a certain stage, we will realize that there's only a limit to what we can do. And at that stage, we need to either stay where we are or back off. If we were to progress further beyond a certain point, then things might start to go wrong. So we have to know when to stop, retreat, and perhaps pause, and then wait for the situation to change, and then we can work out what our next move is. Okay, that's the I Ching, and I want to look at the astrology, what's going on, well, not what's going on now, but what's going on in the past. And let's go to the astrology. Now, before I talk about Bicycle Day, I wanted to talk about the elephant in Butte, Montana. And I got a comment from Linda on, I think, on my last video, and she pointed out that this circus elephant had escaped temporarily. Apparently the escape was only for 10 minutes in the town of Butte, Montana. Of course, I'm not a fan of circus elephants. I don't know. We've all seen Dumbo, haven't we? So that I don't know. I'm not going to make any judgments here. I'm just pointing out that this elephant escaped. And Linda suggested that this might have something to do with the Jupiter-Uranus conjunction. It might be symbolic of the escape. Now, here is a chart for the escape. I don't know precisely what time the elephant escaped. I looked at some local video about the news, and they were saying that it was all happening at around 12:30 in the afternoon in Butte, Montana. And at the time, at 12:30, and the elephant was only out for 10 minutes. There was the Jupiter-Uranus conjunction is starting to form, and Linda suggested that this escaping elephant might actually be connected with the Jupiter-Uranus conjunction. It might be symbolic of it. You know, this was a 58-year-old circus elephant. You know, it didn't cause any trouble. The circus owners were able to gently get it under control. It wasn't, it was, in a sense, it wasn't a big deal. But it's symbolic, perhaps, of Jupiter-Uranus. Perhaps all of us are like the circus element is the circus elephant is just expressing our own need for freedom. And so, there's the Jupiter-Uranus. Conjunction. I don't know when precisely it escaped, but it is possible that the moment of escape, but not for sure, was when the midheaven was exactly semi-sextile the Jupiter-Uranus conjunction. I don't know the precise time it escaped, but it would be good, very symbolic, if the midheaven was semi-square the Jupiter-Uranus midpoint, because the midheaven represents that particular place. It represents the meridian on which Butte, Montana actually is. So I thought that chart was perhaps an interesting chart, and it's just a reminder that the Jupiter-Uranus conjunction is really with us. It's about to happen. And okay, you could also see symbolically from that chart, you've got Aries at the top of the chart. That Aries wanting to take the initiative, that's the elephant, but also midheaven, perhaps semi-square, the Jupiter-Uranus conjunction, but certainly the Jupiter-Uranus conjunction is getting very close, and that the escape of the elephant, even though it was only for 10 minutes, is a reminder that this conjunction is about to take place. Then there is the issue of Bicycle Day. So LSD was synthesized in November 1936 by a man called Albert Hofmann. And Albert Hofmann, this is Albert Hofmann's horoscope. So he was born on January the 11th, 1906 at 3 p.m. He died at the age of 102. So he did, I think, take small doses of LSD throughout his life. This did not seem to have an impact on his longevity. And he was a Capricorn. He had Sun in Capricorn. He had Venus in Capricorn. He also had Jupiter in Taurus. So quite an earthy chart. He regarded his life mission as like taking plants and seeing what they can do to help people in terms of healing. And that's really what he did, because we should remember that LSD is not a fully synthetic substance. It is derived from plants. It's derived from the fungus that grows on rye. If you've know about that book, the Aldous Huxley book, The Devils of Lordoun, when in France in the Middle Ages, where this community got poisoned by rye, by ergot fungus on the rye, and the rye these people were eating the rye, and they were having these hallucinations and visions, and people thought the devil was at work, and it was just this fungus, which is a hallucinogenic fungus, ergo. And so he took this fungus, ergo, and he extracted something else, this what was the chemical called, ergotamine tartrate, and then he synthesized it again, and then he created LSD 25. So it's not a full synthetic LSD. It does have a plant origin, and perhaps that part of that links to the Earth in his chart, because he is a Capricorn, and he also has Saturn on the midheaven. I mean, this is someone who's quite focused on his research. He published a lot of papers. He was a very academic, learned person. When he synthesized LSD, he was working for, I think, the Sandoz laboratories, which were in or around Basel in Switzerland, and so there is definitely a seriousness there. But an aspect that I certainly find interesting in his horoscope is he has Uranus opposition Neptune. Now, Ebertin says of Uranus opposition Neptune that it is the elimination of the waking consciousness. And I think it is connected perhaps with drugs, and perhaps drugs that change our consciousness. And he was born at the time of a Uranus-Neptune opposition, and the North Node is, it's not exactly there, but the North Node is semi-square his Uranus and sesquiquadrate his Neptune, and his North Node. Well, North depends on whether you look at the North or the South Node. His North Node is semi-square his Neptune, sesquiquadrate his Uranus. But maybe that Uranus-Neptune is part of what his mission is. And so those are a few points about Albert Hofmann's horoscope. And so on April the 16th, he accidentally exposed himself to LSD. I don't know. It was in the afternoon. I've gone for 3 p.m., so don't take that ascendant too seriously. So that's the chart for April the 16th, 1943. And what is really interesting about this chart, okay, there are a couple of things that are interesting. Certainly if it was 3 o'clock, we have a Saturn-Uranus conjunction sort of up there, but I don't think we should really take that too seriously because we don't know exactly what time it was doing. Another thing we have to bear in mind when looking at these charts is that Switzerland was an oasis of calm. The Second World War was raging, and so a lot of these aspects are being reflected in what is happening in the rest of Europe and other parts of the world. Look at Neptune. Neptune is at 0 degrees 1 minute Libra. It is exactly opposition the Aries point. And when you're doing astrology, you do need to look at the Aries point. Anything that is aspecting the Aries point, particularly by conjunction, opposition, square, semi-square, sesquiquadrate, you really need to look at that. And Neptune is the universal planet of drugs. And on the Aries point, it's about a new drug coming into the world's consciousness. Sure, LSD had been synthesized in 1936, I think. The synthesis, the LSD synthesis was November the 16th, 1938 was the synthesis of LSD. Neptune, if you go back to the synthesis, all I can say is there's Neptune, late Virgo, when it was synthesized. Moon was applying to the sextile of Neptune. Now, I don't know what time that the synthesis happened, I've just gone for noon, but maybe symbolically, moon to Neptune. 1 degree equals 1 year. They say it's about 5 years between synthesis and before they knew what they got hold of. So that's a chart for the synthesis. Don't look at the moon. Moon is separating from a trine to Uranus, moving to a conjunction of Neptune. So that kind of fits. Remembering that Albert Hofmann has a Uranus Neptune opposition in his chart. So that's a synthesis, and so that's the moment when he accidentally consumed LSD. I think it was on his fingers. I think actually LSD goes through the skin. I think if it's in a sufficient dose, it can go through the skin, so you don't have to necessarily ingest it. And with this chart, Neptune is on the Aries point. Aries is like a gateway. It's a world out there. So this is when LSD became available, when it hit sort of human consciousness. Again, the Aries point. And then he took the stuff. Look, there's Venus. By the way, Venus is perhaps trine Neptune. So that's perhaps really facilitating it, making the thing happen. And Venus trine Neptune. Then he realized that something had happened. He saw visions. He was saying he's lying on a bed, closing his eyes, and he saw lots of stuff. And then 3 days later, he did his experiment where he wanted to see whether it was LSD that really did it. And here is there's a chart for him deliberately taking it. This time he took the time. This was an experiment, and surprise, surprise, Neptune, which was at 0 degrees 1 Libra when he accidentally ingested it, was at 29:57 Virgo 4 minutes earlier, 3 days later. So Neptune had gone retrograde back into Libra, but it was still very much on the Aries point, and it was on the ascendant. About 4 degrees off the ascendant. So you could say that by the time, but I don't know how long LSD takes to work. I think within about 20 minutes, the ascendant was hitting Neptune, but Neptune was rising when he took LSD for the first time. And so I think the important thing about this is the fact that Neptune is really close to the Aries point and rising. Now, there's another thing going on here. Chiron is on the North Node. So what does it mean for Chiron to be on the North Node? It's very close. We've had Chiron on the North Node recently. Chiron, you talk about the wounded healer. I mean, that's one way of looking at it. Chiron is about healing. I suppose one thinks from a medicinal point of view, one sees Chiron as a centaur with all these herbs and potions and whatever at his disposal. And with Chiron conjunct the North Node, we're seeing a new medicine potentially being used. Of course, a medicine that has to be used used in the right way. I mean, I know that there's considerable evidence that if it's used in clinical conditions, that it can be very useful as it can be a useful psychiatric tool. But of course, used in the wrong conditions, it can be an extremely dangerous drug. But still, there is Chiron conjunct the North Node. But how else might Chiron conjunct the North Node be working? We will see. Another point about the moment that LSD is ingested for the first time, and it relates to what we've got now. We've got Saturn-Uranus conjunction coming up over the weekend. Look at Saturn and Uranus. Sorry. Let me start again. Jupiter and Uranus. We haven't got a Saturn-Uranus conjunction coming up over the weekend. We've got a Jupiter-Uranus conjunction coming up over the weekend. So we've got Jupiter-Uranus coming up over the weekend, this weekend. Now, when Albert Hofmann took LSD for the first time, indeed when he accidentally took it, Jupiter is at 1726 Cancer, Uranus is at 2 degrees 34 Gemini. So Jupiter and Uranus are exactly semi-square each other. Exactly semi-square. 6-minute orb. And so Jupiter-Uranus is the idea of freedom. And perhaps this new drug that perhaps offers freedom, it's a new way of looking at the world. And Ebertin describes Jupiter-Uranus as thank the Lord in a sort of mystical thing. So perhaps that's one way of looking at Jupiter-Uranus. But we have to consider what else was going on April the 19th. And in a more tragic sense, or I suppose you could also say it was heroic, was the Warsaw Ghetto uprising, which happened on the same day. So this is a chart I sort of read somewhere, but that German and Ukrainian troops, and I think there was some one of the Baltic states, troops from there, but certainly German and Ukrainian troops entered the Warsaw Ghetto with the aim of rounding up the Jews and sending them off to presumably for extermination. And the Jews realized the Jews in the ghetto realized what was happening, and so they took the view, well, they had nothing to lose. So we had an uprising which took a long time for the Nazis, the Germans, to suppress. And so the positions at the time of the Warsaw Ghetto, the planetary positions at the time of the Ghetto uprising, were not so dissimilar to what they were at the time when Albert Hofmann was taking his LSD in nice, sedate, comfortable Switzerland. Same continent, a few hundred miles away, very different world. And likewise, we have a Jupiter-Uranus semi-square between. We have the Jupiter-Uranus semi-square. It's about the principle of freedom. Now we can, with the LSD, we can talk about freedom in a sort of vague way, in a sort of spiritual way, and we can, it's all very vague, pie in the sky. This is real. These people were expressing their freedom. They were, they were resisting the Germans, and it was an uprising. And I think that is a way that Jupiter-Uranus can work. Remember that the Arab Spring started when this Tunisian street vendor, who was just being frustrated by authorities telling him what he could do, telling him what he couldn't do, and in the end he just couldn't make money, and in the end he set himself on fire. And Jupiter-Uranus, at the time of an exact Jupiter-Uranus conjunction, in the year after the Prague Spring, when the Soviets crushed the Czechoslovak attempts to be more independent and to be freer, Jan Palach set himself on fire in Prague in January 1969. That was around the time of the Jupiter-Uranus conjunction. Again, so here we have an exact Jupiter-Uranus semi-square, and this is when the Warsaw uprising started to happen. And this really does emphasize the point. If you're doing astrology, you must look at semi-squares and sesquiquadrates. Semi-squares and sesquiquadrates are more powerful than trines and sextiles. More difficult to find. You just need to get used to looking for them. But absolutely, semi-squares, sesquiquadrates, under no circumstances, in my opinion, should be neglected in Western astrology. And we have the North Node Chiron conjunction. Can we talk about centaurs and their medical kits when you're talking about the Warsaw Ghetto uprising? you could say that this is, in a very heavy sense, Chiron the maverick, Chiron the rebel. And I think this does indicate there is something rebellious about Chiron, not doing things the usual way. I mean, don't forget, in so many cases, it was easy for the Nazis, for the Germans to round up Jews, send them to camps, but with Chiron conjunct North Node, they weren't going to do it. They weren't the Jews in the ghetto were not going to take it. I would have liked to have. There was the leader of the Warsaw Ghetto uprising. I looked him up, but I couldn't find his date of birth. I know he was born in 1919. I would have liked to have found his date of birth. But with Chiron conjunct the North Node, I think there is something rebellious about it. Also, there's something potentially tragic about Chiron, and so Chiron in North Node, it is a tragedy, obviously, and just to talk about wounded healer seems a bit, I don't know, that just seems a bit trite, and doesn't really seem to fit the intensity of the day. and what it began, but certainly there's our Chiron on a North Node. So I think that is really something that we need to think about. Also, I should point out the Ghetto uprising had Mars square Uranus, so there is something very rebellious about it. Okay, Mars square UK. You had Mars square Uranus when, at the same time, in another country, when Albert Hofmann was taking LSD, you had Mars square Uranus. I suppose you could say Mars in Pisces, square Uranus. It was, in a sense, rebellious, but it not in this sense. I mean, this is real rebellion. Mars square Uranus, and of course Jupiter semi-square Uranus. So what about the prenatal lunations in general? Because now we can move and look at the events in 1943 in general. And we just have to remember that 1943, everything was happening in Europe. It was in the middle of the Second World War. Yes, there was the Warsaw Ghetto uprising. Yes, there was Albert Hofmann taking LSD, but all over the continent. Also, you had the war in the Far East. So the world was hectic, to say the least. So this is the new moon on April the 4th, 1943. To what extent does it foreshadow what was happening? Okay, I've set this for Basel. Okay, so from Basel's perspective, okay, you could say Uranus is quite close to the descendant, so something interesting may be about to happen. But from an astrocartography point of view, let me just look at that from the perspective of Europe. So there is, these are all the places where Uranus was exactly on the descendant. So there's Switzerland, but it goes through Europe. I mean, you can see that there's a place where Neptune is on the midheaven and Uranus is on the descendant. It's actually pretty close to Warsaw. So I think that, if anything, this new moon if you look at the astrocartography from a new moon, yeah, it sort of goes through Switzerland, this Uranus on a descendant line, but I think it's more about going through Poland and being close to Warsaw, and this exact spot where Neptune is on the midheaven and Uranus is on the descendant kind of is indicative of the uprising, and we can let's just relocate. So if that's set for Basel, let's relocate that. We'll relocate to to Warsaw in... So there's a chart set for Warsaw. There's Neptune on the midheaven, and there's a Saturn Uranus conjunction on the descendant. So I think that Saturn Uranus conjunction on the descendant does fit the uprising. Neptune on the midheaven fits what's going on in Warsaw. In Switzerland, taking LSD. But this is set for Warsaw. It's not set for Basel. So Neptune on the midheaven may represent, the Warsaw uprising. It was hopeless. I mean, those organising the uprising, they kind of knew it was hopeless. Neptune on the midheaven, but it's better to do that than just to die. I mean, that's just to die without fighting. Then we have the full moon just before the Ghetto uprising and Albert Hofmann taking LSD for the first time. That's interesting because there's the full moon, March 21st, 1943, the full moon before LSD is taken for the first time, and there we have Neptune exactly on the full moon. So that completely fits what happened in Switzerland. Doesn't tell us about the location, but in general, set for Basel, it's not that full moon's not on the midheaven. It's not on the ascendant. It's just the fact that the new moon, we can expect perhaps the full moon. That fits because this drug was synthesized in 1938, and it's just sitting there. There's a synthesis. It's just sitting there, not really doing anything. And then it takes until the full moon is about realization. We see the truth of the matter. We see the truth of what's happening, and the truth. When we realize what this drug can actually do, it's the power of this drug. I suppose you could also say that this, in terms of Warsaw Ghetto, it's about the Neptune is about the deception. I don't know what the Germans were saying to the Jewish community as they rounded them up, but maybe there was a high sense of deception here. But full moon opposition Neptune, you see through the deception. That's another way of looking at it. Okay, so that's all I'm going to say about LSD and the Warsaw Ghetto. I just think it's really important to note that we had these two events happening on the same day, the beginning of the Warsaw Ghetto uprising and the first deliberate, or indeed first deliberate dosing of LSD. Very different events. And I think what we need to try and do is take the symbolism and see how astrological symbolism can work in very different ways. Okay, I hope you found that of some interest. If you enjoyed this video, I would be grateful if you were to indicate that you liked it. If you're not subscribed and you enjoyed the video, I would of course be incredibly grateful if you were to subscribe. And if you want to buy me a coffee, there is a link in the description. So thank you very much for listening, and I will talk to you again tomorrow.